I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people who want to improve their body composition. When I first asked them what they were doing about it, they typically tell me, I started to jog or I started to walk. Of course, this is a great start towards getting in better shape. These slower aerobic exercises can help to reduce the risk of a number of health issues. They may also reduce body fat and improve your body composition. But improving body composition not only has to do with losing body fat, it has a lot to do with either maintaining or increasing muscle mass as well. So, is it possible to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time? Maybe. To do so, you must understand which types of exercise will promote fat loss and which types of exercise will promote muscle gain, and how they can be used in conjunction with each other to achieve the best of both worlds. This lecture will focus specifically on exercise to increase fat loss. In doing so, we'll examine several types of exercise and discuss the science behind how fat loss actually works. Fat loss is a process that really takes place in your mitochondria. That's the place where you have all the fat-burning machinery inside each cell. It's a place where you use oxygen to break down fat and carbohydrate to create ATP for energy. So it makes sense that one way to burn more fat is to increase the number of mitochondria that you have in your cells. This is called mitochondrial density. Basically, the more mitochondria you have, the more fat you can burn and the more ATP you can supply to your muscles. Now, it's well known that aerobic endurance exercise training, something like cycling or jogging at a slow to moderate pace, will increase your mitochondrial density. But are there other things and other ways we can do this? We hear phrases like fat burning and belly busting and trimming and slimming in the exercise industry all the time. And some of these phrases even suggest that you can spot reduce or lose weight from one specific body area. But is this true? Well, the answer is no. There's no such thing as a spot reduction. You cannot work out specifically at your stomach or your arms and expect to lose fat from those areas only. I realize this goes against many TV and magazine advertisements. But trust me, when we lose fat weight, it's not solely coming from the areas that we work out. So you might ask, where does most of fat loss occur? And what dictates where this fat loss will come from? Well, consider your body. You've probably noticed predictable patterns where you gain or lose weight. Have you ever said, it all goes to my hips, or it all goes to my belly? Where your body stores excess fat has a lot to do with your genetics and your sex. These factors will determine the pattern and relative concentration of certain receptors within fat tissue that either inhibit or activate fat mobilization from each fat cell and eventually fat burning in the mitochondria of your muscles. Alpha receptors are the brakes on fat mobilization. They inhibit it. Beta receptors are the accelerators of fat mobilization. They activate it. So it makes sense that the more alpha cells inhibiting fat mobilization that you have in a specific body area, the more trouble you might have losing fat from that area, and vice versa for the beta receptors. More beta receptors in an area of your body, the more fat burning or fat mobilization you will have in that area. A good example is the typical fat distribution patterns among men and women. Men tend to store excess fat in their abdomen and belly, and as you probably suspect, have a higher concentration of alpha receptors or inhibitors in that area. Women often store excess fat in their hips and thighs, and also have a greater number of alpha receptors in these tissues. But Men doing crunches or women doing glute exercises will not necessarily accelerate fat loss more so than any other exercise, either at those specific sites or elsewhere on their bodies. So you should think of doing much more than specific body part exercises. Instead, for fat loss, you need to do an assortment of exercises that involve and impact your whole body. So, what are those exercises? Well, first, there are two major categories of exercise. One is aerobic exercise, like walking, running, swimming, or cycling. And the second is resistance exercises, like lifting weights or doing body weight strength movements. Aerobic exercise is repetitive and relies on the continuous activation of the heart and lungs, often called the cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory exercise. Most people think that aerobic exercise is the key piece needed for fat loss. Resistance exercise is less continuous and involves moving or lifting objects with forceful muscle contractions. Resistance exercise is typically related to gains in muscle mass. But plenty of evidence shows that it is actually an excellent fat loss tool and way to improve body composition. Most major governing bodies that provide exercise recommendations, like the American College of Sports Medicine, suggest that using both aerobic and resistance exercise. This should provide benefits for both improving health and body composition. A combination of exercise types is also a good idea for fat loss. With this in mind, you probably are asking yourself, which types of aerobic exercise and which types of resistance exercise will maximize fat loss specifically? Let's begin with aerobic exercise. There are several factors we can manipulate when it comes to aerobic exercise. We can change the mode or the kind of exercise. For example, swimming to running to cycling to dancing and back again. We can change the duration of the exercise, 20 or 30 minutes or an hour or more. And we can change the intensity of the exercise or how difficult it feels, which is often based on your heart rate zone or your own subjective feelings. And finally, we can change the frequency of this exercise and how often you work out, say over the course of a week or a month. In general, just keep in mind that something is better than nothing. The more physical work we do, the more calories we burn, and the greater chance for our total calorie deficit to help with fat loss. But there are certain choices we can make to maximize our aerobic exercise specifically for the greatest fat loss over a given time spent exercising. Personally, I still compete in triathlon races of various distances every year. And triathlon involves swimming, biking, and running in that order. So altering mode, duration, intensity, and frequency of exercise is a very common occurrence for me. I'll change all of these factors over the course of training in order to optimize my body composition, performance, and health. Let's first consider the mode or the type of aerobic exercise. Much of this comes down to your own personal preference. What do you enjoy doing? What is your accessibility to certain equipment like a bike or a pool? What time of year is it? Is it snowy or is it really hot? What is your personal injury history? Certain activities may be less stressful to achy joints or problem areas. Now, it might make sense that the more movement you do, the better. So if you run versus just sitting on a recumbent bike for the same amount of time, you will probably have more effective fat loss because you're actually using both your upper and your lower body during exercise. And with more muscles being worked, more overall energy is usually expended. So what about swimming? Swimming requires both upper and lower body muscle groups. But it seems that for a given intensity, swimming will expend fewer calories than either running or cycling. Why? Well, the answer is not as clear as we would like it. It is thought that the reduced energy expenditure for equally intense swimming exercise may be related to a lower heart rate during swimming compared to running or cycling, even when it feels like you're working out at the same effort. The primary reason for this is your body position during exercise. In a more upright exercise like running and biking, the heart must work to a larger extent against gravity to return blood back to the heart. Think of the blood vessels in your body as a column, with the heart resting at the top. In relation to gravity, the larger the distance between the heart and the bottom of the column, the greater distance that must be overcome. With upright exercise, your heart rate must be increased to overcome this greater vertical distance and assist with getting blood back to your heart. Swimming, however, requires you to lie flat, either supine or prone. In this position, the distance from the heart to the bottom of our column is considerably smaller in terms of gravity. So blood travels back to the heart quite easily. This requires less work for the heart and a lower heart rate. But if you're an avid swimmer, don't worry. Most times you swim in cool water, which may also increase your total calorie burn. This is because you not only have to work hard just to swim, but you also have to keep your body temperature within a normal range. Similarly, this concept stands for running or cycling outside in the cold. Try to remember this next time you are dreading your cold morning workouts. Maybe this knowledge will help it a little bit more to make it worth it to step outside into the frigid air. Okay, what if you're not a runner, cyclist, or swimmer? Well, aerobic classes like step or dance are not a bad idea, especially if they make your exercise more enjoyable for you. However, it's often more difficult to regulate the intensity of these types of classes, and also it may be less continuous form of exercise than some other choices, with small breaks given occasionally. In general, running may actually be the most optimal aerobic exercise type for fat loss. However, if you absolutely loathe running or cannot run due to musculoskeletal limitations or injuries, every other form of movement is good and can result in significant improvements in your body composition when paired with nutritional choices that are good and lifestyle habits. The next aspect of aerobic exercise that you can manipulate to improve fat loss is the length of time that you exercise, or exercise duration. It is known that the length of time you exercise and the amount of calories you burn are directly and linearly related. Makes sense. The longer you work, the more calories you're burned. This is pretty simple. But how much time out of your day are you willing to give? Sure, if you run for 2 hours, you will burn more calories than if you run for 45 minutes, resulting in more overall fat loss. However, this option may not be feasible or desirable. I even see a lot of people who actually exercise for a long time, but never change or improve. This is because the exercise is not intense enough, or their eating habits preclude the loss of fat. Let's say you want the body composition changes that 2 hours of exercise would give you, but you've only got 45 minutes to spare in the day. What if you could burn the same amount of calories in those 45 minutes that you could over 2 hours by simply changing one thing about the way you exercise? Well, you can, and that one thing is the intensity of your exercise. If there's one thing that you take away from this lecture, It is that intensity is king when it comes to fat loss. Intensity is a measure of how hard you are working. As I mentioned before, this could be measured by how you feel or quantified by heart rate, exercise speed, or incline. Now, a major misconception is that the idea that low-intensity exercise is better for fat loss. We discussed this in the last lecture, but it's a point that bears repeating. Low-intensity exercise is often called the fat burn zone. There's even a button on many exercise machines called the fat burning zone for low-intensity exercise. But here's a nice fat loss tip. You can actually use a whole lot of fat by exercising for far less time per day. But there's one caveat. You must work out very hard. This is where high-intensity interval training, or HIIT, comes into play. You simply intermix rest periods with very high-intensity work. So you might run fast for 1 minute and then recover at a slow jog pace for 1 minute and repeat this for 20 minutes. First, remember that two major fueling sources used during exercise are stored fat and stored carbohydrate. The use of each exists along a continuum and is never only stored fat or only stored carbohydrates. However, a greater proportion of fat will be metabolized at rest and during lower intensity exercise, while a greater proportion of carbohydrate will be metabolized at higher intensities. This is where the fat burn at low intensity myth comes into the picture. Based on this principle, we of course want to work out at low intensities, right? The fat burn zone, well, actually no. It is true that at rest and at lower intensities, we will use fat as a fuel primarily. But think about this. If the relative proportion of fat used for metabolism dictated actual fat loss, wouldn't the best exercise be sitting on the couch? When relative fat metabolism is at its highest? We know this isn't the case. So how could low-intensity exercise be any different? Instead, change your thinking. The best way to think of exercise for fat loss is how much fuel you are burning overall, not which fuel type you are using. High-intensity exercise will burn more fuel than low-intensity exercise. Running a mile burns more fuel than walking a mile. When we exercise at higher intensities, we will burn more carbohydrates for energy. And when we exercise at lower intensities, we will burn more fat for energy. But using fat for fuel during exercise will not result in the greatest overall losses to total body fat over time. So the fat burn zone may not be named appropriately, and it is misleading. So, how then will higher intensity exercise result in greater fat loss? The best way to think about this is in terms of oxygen consumption. We all have an oxygen consumption demand at rest in order to maintain normal body processes that we've discussed throughout this course. When you exercise, the oxygen demand is increased to bring oxygen to your working muscles. Just think about the last time you hustled up a staircase and began breathing hard. This is in part due to a greater need for oxygen to help out your muscles. The greater intensity at which we exercise, the greater our oxygen demand. Well, once we come down from our high oxygen consumption after exercise, our resting oxygen consumption will also run a little high in the next several hours for a number of reasons. It's believed that this elevated oxygen consumption is necessary to replenish certain energy systems and help bring down your elevated body temperature. Your body is taking care of itself to restore order and prepare to do it again if needed. This time after exercise, where you require more oxygen, is called excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC. Exercise that is really tough results in a greater magnitude of EPOC. Like I just mentioned, this period of heightened oxygen consumption is similar to your car's engine staying warm after you drive. Your body expends more energy after exercise to come back to normal or back to homeostasis. Your body will work on processes like restoring ATP and glycogen that were used during exercise, bringing your body temperature back to normal and starting to repair damaged muscle tissue. So, with a high-intensity workout, you will burn energy during and after the exercise too. But just how much will you burn? Well, that is dependent on, most importantly, how hard you exercise and somewhat on how long you exercise. If your number one reason not to exercise is your time, which is the number one excuse that I hear all the time, then this technique of going very hard, but for a short time, eliminates that excuse. Well, how do you start? Do you just go out and sprint? Chances are we won't last very long. And if you're like me, you'll probably injure yourself. Instead, warm up with a few minutes of walking and things like jumping jacks, lunges, or body weight squats. And then break your workout sessions into segments of high-intensity efforts and easy recovery. You can find access to a number of interval or HIIT workouts online, in training books, or from a coach. Now, some interval workouts go by minutes, and some go by distance, and some just go by how you feel. But the goal is always to work hard during the active phase and then recover for a period of time before the next active or work phase. As you become more fit, you can extend the hard work phase and decrease the recovery time. A reasonable place to start could be 30 seconds very hard, followed by 1 minute of easy recovery. You could even try mailbox or telephone pole intervals, where you simply run hard from mailbox 1 to mailbox 2, and then go easy until mailbox 3, and then repeat. You might even find interval exercise to be more enjoyable, as it breaks your workout down into segments and makes the time go by more quickly. Actually, it does go by more quickly because you can work out for less total time. Research shows that interval training results in greater overall adherence to exercise and may be more enjoyable than continuous, lower intensity exercise. This is just one of many reasons for its effectiveness. In fact, in my own research, we've shown that interval training combined with resistance training is incredibly effective for reducing body fat levels. HIIT is thought to have this effect in part because it's been shown to increase mitochondrial density and to increase the number and activity of enzymes like citrate synthase, malate dehydrogenase, and others needed to break down carbohydrates and fat to make ATP. In some HIIT research, changes in these enzymes were shown after just 7 weeks of exercising 3 days per week by doing 4 to 10 30-second maximal sprints on a bike, followed by 4 minutes of recovery. HIIT has also been shown to be as effective, or maybe even more effective, at improving heart health than low-intensity exercise that burned the same number of calories. So, when it comes to exercise intensity for fat loss, choose higher over lower. And the best way to do this may be through interval training. And keep in mind, though, that this level of activity is very hard, so you really shouldn't do it every day. It's best to mix in days of HIIT and days of slow to moderate intensity aerobic exercise. This should help to maximize fat loss and keep you from getting hurt. And start with an amount of time that you can fit into your schedule. we've shown great results with HIIT for just 20 to 30 minutes. Essentially, you can start with very little exercise and have a great response for improving your body composition. This brings up the next question. How often should you be exercising? Frequency is the last important aspect of exercise to help with weight and health. This refers to the number of times you exercise per week. For general health, you should exercise 3 to 5 days per week, according to the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines. But what about for fat loss specifically? These same guidelines suggest aerobic exercise should be completed at least 5 days a week to maintain or increase weight loss. Think about it. The more often you exercise, the more opportunities throughout the week you have to burn calories, both during the actual exercise and after exercise too. So it's in your best interest then to slowly increase the number of planned workout sessions per week to take advantage of both of these opportunities. For fat loss, you now know that it's best to incorporate multiple types of exercise: aerobic, HIIT training, and resistance. But for aerobic endurance exercise, here are a few ways to get the most possible fat loss from your workouts. First, move lots of muscle. This is why running may be most effective for fat loss. Second, choose higher intensity exercise through interval training rather than low intensity exercise, even when the same caloric cost is happening. Third, exercise longer rather than shorter when comparing exercises of the same intensity. And fourth, exercise at least 5 days per week to see the most improvement. If you're feeling overwhelmed, don't worry. It is best to only make one change at a time. For example, to try to change up your exercise in one small way today that is practical for you. Then, little by little, try to incorporate more of these options to maximize fat loss. It is not a good idea to change everything all at once. In fact, this is a sure way to failure. Let me explain. You will not begin your program at 6 days a week for 60 minutes a time doing intervals. Instead, you would follow another principle of exercise science, which is progression. And be sure to progress your exercise plan and push yourself within reason. Why? Because if you incorporated all these suggestions immediately, chances are you will become overwhelmed and drop the fitness thing altogether. But something is better than nothing, and more is better than less in most cases. And as you feel comfortable, you can begin to tailor that something towards fat loss. This way, you can achieve more than you already do each and every day. Now that we've talked about aerobic exercise, what about resistance training for fat loss? In a number of research studies that I've been working on over the years, we've demonstrated that combining high-intensity interval training and resistance training is most effective for fat loss and improving body composition. It turns out that resistance training is a very powerful tool for changing body composition. You see, with only aerobic exercise, it is far easier to change your overall size, but much harder to alter the way that it looks physically. I often say that you can change from a big pear shape to a small pear shape, but you need to add resistance exercise if you truly want to add lean muscle and change the way you look. Adding lean mass from resistance training is important for fat loss specifically. Why and how is this the case? Well, the addition of resistance training to your activity may kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. It will add lean muscle mass, which is metabolically active. This means that it uses a few more calories than other tissues and contributes to your total daily caloric output. In a previous lecture, I described muscle tissue as very metabolically active tissue, or hungry tissue. This means that muscle tissue specifically requires a little bit more energy to be maintained than fat mass. Therefore, the greater amount of muscle mass on your body, the greater energy demands overall, which equals more calories expended each day just for body maintenance. Resistance training actually increases lipolysis or fat mobilization. In fact, our research group published a few research papers on this in the Journal of Applied Physiology. We found that resistance training alone was effective for increased lipolysis from belly fat in healthy young men and in both sedentary lean and obese men. Resistance training also increases EPOC, or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, just like aerobic exercise, but maybe even more. For example, after 45 minutes of cycling at 70% of maximum, metabolism stayed high for another 14 hours, burning about 190 calories over a control group. Similarly, traditional resistance training with 4 sets of 8 exercises done for 8 to 12 repetitions has been shown to burn about 100 extra calories over the 22 hours following resistance exercise. However, the authors of this study also found that if the resistance exercise was completed at a much higher intensity, this time using heavy weight to complete exhaustion for 6 repetitions, with only 20 seconds of rest between sets, the calorie burn was 23% greater than the traditional group. The high-intensity group burned 452 calories over the same 22-hour period. And best of all, most of the extra burn was from fat. Now, these studies were done in men, but the authors suggested that when body mass is equated, no difference between men and women exists. So combining the fat-burning effect of aerobic and resistance exercise seems to offer the maximal benefits for fat loss, as described in several recent studies from my lab and others. The combination also looks to be more favorable than aerobic exercise alone in combating certain types of chronic disease, including muscle wasting, osteoporosis, and perhaps even type 2 diabetes. Exactly which kinds of resistance exercise will increase muscle mass, referred to as hypertrophy, will be covered later. But for now, realize the incredibly important role of resistance exercise for fat loss. We've discussed the basis for aerobic exercise and resistance exercise for fat loss. How can we determine if we are successful? How quickly or slowly should we expect to lose fat based on these described principles? I will end our discussion with a few more rules of thumb for rating your fat loss success. It is important to mention first that your rate of fat loss will be different from others depending on your age, your sex, how much fat you have to lose, as well as your unique physiology. In general, fat loss should be gradual. A small amount should be lost every week, which would add up to big gains over time. Again, just like it took a while to put the fat on your body, give it time to come off your body too. To me, the most important factor is how you answer these questions. Are you feeling good? And is your energy level good? These are real-world questions, and if they are not a resounding yes, then something in your life has to change. Once you see some results, you may want to work with a professional to continue to make progress in your workouts and nutrition, and to continue to meet your body composition goals. Later in the course, I'll go over some important things to look for if you choose to work with a personal trainer. So, if you really want to change your body composition, the important thing to worry about is how much fat you burn and how many calories you use in the bigger picture, like over a week, a month, or a year. To do this, you probably need to be exercising vigorously at least a few times a week. Recently, the Journal of the American Medical Association reported that the more vigorous activity you do, the lower your mortality. Keep in mind, though, that you still need to incorporate rest days and days where you simply take a walk, stretch, or hike with a friend in order to recover from your hard exercise sessions. Just remember to tailor your program to target fat loss and your own needs, with fat loss success defined as you feeling the best you've ever felt and achieving gradual fat loss over the long term. Implementing both aerobic endurance exercise and resistance exercise allows for changes that will last a lifetime. Try this. Replace one of your longer, slower exercise sessions with short, high-intensity intervals each week.